Minnemissionona Creek has troubles, as we've seen, but it's not the only tributary of the Minnesota River with serious problems. And communities throughout the basin are going to great lengths to address their water quality challenges. The Upper Sioux community is one of them. The Upper Sioux community is on the Minnesota River near Granite Falls. Megan Ulrich is the community's water quality specialist. Today, she's headed to Hazel Creek, which meanders through the reservation on its way to the Minnesota River.
I sample this body of water monthly during the field season for little critters that live in the water called macroinvertebrates. These particular critters can only survive in really healthy water. And then group 3, these are pollution tolerant organisms, so they can live in any range of the water. Some of these critters live on the bottoms of rocks, some live in undercut banks, some live on the vegetation that's emerging out of the water. They can't run away from pollution, you know, so they're a very good indicator of water quality. You can see how fast the water is running, so it's carrying a lot of the silt with it, and it's just fine and mucky. It's so fine that it clogs up my 500 micron net. And you can imagine if you have gills, what that does to you. It's easy to think of pollution as being like, oh, a chemical in the water like mercury or bacteria, but you know, when we're getting really big rain events and the water is really flashy and we have a large volume of water flowing through the river at once, that's a form of pollution. When you have a lot of suspended sediment, that's another form of pollution. When you have so many different impacts, I think there's kind of like a perfect storm for all the life that's in the water.
Growing up along the Minnesota River, the water was clear and, you know, you could see the bottom of the river.
Carrie Schomer is an elder in the Upper Sioux community. She was born in a village along the river and has been an eyewitness to the river's changes.
Where I lived along the river bottoms down there, we used to go swimming in it. The turtles, you know, they would, you know, sometimes they would just come up and they'd be looking at you, you know, and then they'd go down. And
for 20 years, Carrie was a professor of the Dakota language at the University of Minnesota.
Sota means, you know, this clear. Minnesota. The translation for that is the reflection of the sky in the water. They translate it as the sky blue waters. And you know that the river is not sky blue anymore. It used to be.
This is just nuts to see the devastation on this bank and here, and just how many, you can see how many trees have come down because the bank's gone.
The Water Resources Center at Minnesota State Mankato also keeps tabs on Hazel Creek and the entire Minnesota River Basin.
We're involved with river and lake studies, monitoring water quality, looking at chemistry and biota. Water Resource Center, the SCOT.
The center collects data and publishes a report on the trends in water quality.
We do the State of the Minnesota River report, which comes out every 2 years. There are some trends that are improving, like phosphorus. We also know that some trends are static, like mussels.
Mussels, at one stage in their life, have to live in the gills of fish and amphibians. Because of the way they live and that they are filter feeders and travel on the bottom of the body of water, they're very sensitive to pollution and siltation. Oh, and I brought some of my mussel shells collected previously. We happen to know that many mussels are locally extinct in the Minnesota River.
At one time, historically, there was 42 mussels found in the Minnesota River Basin. Now we only find 23. But we also know that that 23 has been fairly stable for the last 10, 15 years. And some trends like nitrates, we know that they're rising.
Green algae usually indicates too much nitrate nitrogen in the water. Take Lake Titlow, a shallow prairie lake near Gaylord in Sibley County. For decades, it has not been swimmable or fishable.
I'm gonna grab my old rod and reel. I'm headed out towards the lake. Important plans I have to make.
There is some runoff from the city, but most of the water in Lake Titlow comes from streams on the west side of the lake that have been turned into agricultural drainage ditches. Geologist Bryce Hoppy.
The city itself has gone to extraordinary lengths over the last few years to make sure that their storm sewers don't drain into the lake anymore. And the business end is supposed to point forward, right? So today we're here to install the weather and water quality monitoring station in Lake Titlow. The station allows us to link water quality parameters with weather parameters. How fast the rain falls has a lot to do with how much mud washes into the lake. That instrument that we lower into the lake tells us the temperature, the pH, the amount of oxygen in the water, the amount of solid mud that's suspended in the water, and it's hooked up to that modem, and we can call it up day and night and see what the lake's doing. We first post it on our websites at Minnesota State Mankato for everyone to see, so that people who live in the community can become engaged. You put in 400 milliliters of the ferric.
Okay. I grew up along the Minnesota River, and I'm extremely interested in learning more about this watershed and what is affecting this watershed and what I can do as a citizen to help improve the water quality and improve the environment that I live in.
Where, when, and by what processes the nutrients in the mud are washing into the lake. Once we understand that, we'll be able to go attack those problem areas and potentially do something about cleaning up the lake. A lake that's back to being a fishery, a lake that's back to being a waterfall habitat, a lake that can be used for recreation, for swimming and boating purposes. Right now, this lake doesn't meet any of those purposes.
Is it possible that this is where we had the news conference in '92?
Arnie Carlson said in 1992, we need to be able to swim, we need to be able to fish, picnic, recreate in this Minnesota River Basin.
But isn't that beautiful?
Frankly, any river being polluted is a disgrace. And from a policy perspective, in terms of governmental management, can agencies work together towards some common goals, knowing full well that there's a lot of give and take? You know, the word compromise is not accepted in all political quarters these days, and that's unfortunate. But
I think we have a responsibility with what happens to how we treat the water that flows through our backyards and how it impacts people in other parts of the country.
Maybe now we might have the knowledge that we've been acquiring here, the driving force by the community members, plus the financial support from the state in order to actually start doing something about the amount of sediment and the nutrients that wash into this lake.